The night was cold and wrapped in a dense fog as Ethan walked across the nearly deserted university campus. There was something different about that night, something he couldn't explain but made him feel like something was about to happen, something that would change the world around him. He had noticed Claire since the beginning of the semester. Always quiet, avoiding attention, her eyes held an enigmatic glow that drew him in like a moth to a flame. But that night Ethan noticed something even more peculiar. Her silhouette was disappearing into the darkness along a path that led to the university's old, abandoned library, a place everyone avoided because of rumors about strange events. Something within him urged him to follow her, as if an invisible destiny was about to unfold. Deep down, he knew Claire harbored deep mysteries, but what he would discover that night would go far beyond anything he could have imagined. And as the wind whispered through the trees, a question echoed in his mind: who she really is? Ethan was an engineering student with big dreams and a simple life. At 21, he always preferred to go unnoticed, spending his time on studies, series, and games. But something had started to change since the beginning of the semester. Claire. Claire, a design student with an air of mystery, always seemed to be one step ahead of the rest of the class. Tall, with light hair that reflected light like silk, and eyes of such a deep brown they seemed to hold hidden secrets, she stood out to him. She wasn't popular, nor did she care to be, often even avoiding attention, but her presence was impossible to ignore. When she spoke in class, her voice was like a soft melody, and when she laughed, though it was rare, there was an almost supernatural magnetism to her smile. The campus where they studied had a history of its own. Built over the ruins of an old pioneer village from the early 19th century, the place was steeped in legends. The abandoned library was the focus of many of them. Rumor had it that strange books in foreign languages filled their shelves, guarding secrets of magic and the occult, and that at night, strange lights could be seen through its broken windows. Many dismissed it as a university myth, but others swore the place had a different energy, one that gave off an eerie sensation. The day that would change everything began with something simple. During a group project, Ethan and Claire were paired together. It was the first time he really talked to her, and every word exchanged seemed to spark his curiosity about the girl. Claire was fascinating, with a sharp intelligence and a sense of humor as peculiar as it was delightful. But there were moments when she would stare into the void, as if listening to something no one else could hear. That night, as Ethan followed her toward the library, he had no idea he was about to cross an invisible line. A line that would lead him to uncover a secret that would change not only how he saw Claire but also himself and his life. The path to the library seemed longer than Ethan remembered, shrouded in darkness. He tried to convince himself he was just curious, but he knew the real reason was Claire. Something about her drew his attention and unsettled him, as if each encounter with her pulled him closer to a secret waiting to be revealed. When he finally reached the library, he hesitated upon seeing Claire standing outside, facing the old, weathered door. She was holding a large, ancient book with a faded black leather cover and a strange, prominent symbol. Before he could retreat, Claire turned and looked straight at him. "You followed me," she said, her voice void of surprise. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," Ethan replied, his heart racing. Claire let out a small smile. "If you wanted answers, you could have just asked." She stepped closer, and the glow in her eyes seemed more intense under the moonlight. Before he could say anything, a sound broke through the air, a distant whisper coming from inside the library. Ethan found it strange, but Claire didn't seem surprised. On the contrary, she opened the door and gestured for him to follow. "If you've come this far, you must be ready to see who I really am," she said. Inside the library, the air was thick, as if something extraordinary could happen at any moment. The dusty shelves and old books, dimly lit by scattered candles, created a foreboding atmosphere. Claire stopped in the center of the main room, placed the book on a table, and began murmuring words in a language Ethan had never heard. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the space, extinguishing what little light remained. Ethan felt the tension rise, but he couldn't move. Soon, the room's darkness dissipated, and the atmosphere turned calm and almost welcoming. Claire looked at him, her eyes now glowing with an intense light. "I'm a witch, Ethan," she said with a haunting calm. "And you've just stepped into my world." Ethan, unable to process the situation, muttered that it was getting late and he needed to get home. Then he left the library running. After that night, Ethan couldn't get Claire out of his mind. He felt both fascination and fear, intrigued by the idea of witches being real and even more so by Claire being one. The world she had revealed seemed to defy all logic, yet Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her and the mysteries surrounding her. In the days that followed, Claire kept her distance, avoiding Ethan. This only deepened his doubts and his desire to understand her better. He started noticing how she had no close friends, how she seemed to carry a burden. Her loneliness moved him as he knew what it felt like to be alone. Their connection began to grow when Ethan found Claire sitting quietly in the campus garden on a rainy afternoon, far from anyone else. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but eventually did. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Claire tried to brush it off but couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she replied coldly but without conviction. "I know something's bothering you," Ethan said. "I don't know what it is, but I want to help. Even if you don't want to tell me what's going on." Claire looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She wasn't used to someone genuinely caring. After a few moments of silence, she murmured, "No one can help me." Ethan sat beside her, ignoring the rain. "Maybe no one's tried hard enough," he replied. From that moment on, Claire began to see Ethan as a friend. Slowly, they started spending more time together, sharing stories, dreams, and insecurities. Ethan discovered that Claire had a talent for painting and that her works often reflected feelings and events she couldn't put into words. He, in turn, took her to hidden spots on campus, showing her how he loved exploring and finding beauty in things others overlooked. But with each step Ethan took toward Claire, something seemed to unsettle him. One day, while walking through an empty hallway in the building where they studied, he felt a chill and heard faint whispers calling his name. When he turned, he realized he was alone. Another night, as he walked down the street, he noticed a dark shadow following him. He quickened his pace, but the shadow remained in the corner of his vision. When he finally mustered the courage to turn around, the figure vanished. A chill ran down his spine, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. When Ethan told Claire what was happening, she turned pale. "They know," she whispered, her eyes filled with fear. "Who knows what?" Ethan asked, confused and concerned. "The forces guarding the path between the two worlds," Claire replied, her voice trembling. "They don't want you near me. The more you insist, the more dangerous it will become." Ethan took her hand, determined. "I don't know what these things are, but I'm not leaving your side no matter what happens." Claire looked at him with a mix of surprise, gratitude, and fear. "You don't understand. These things aren't human. What you've seen so far was just a warning. They'll do everything they can to separate us." That same night, Ethan dreamed of a dark, empty field, surrounded by distorted shadows whispering his name. In the center of the field, Claire was trapped in a cage of fire, calling out to him. When he tried to reach her, the shadows held him back, whispering warnings and threats. When he woke up, he found something in his hand, a small black stone shaped like a skull. When he showed it to Claire, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "It's a warning," she said. "They're marking you. I think it's best if you stay away before it's too late." But Ethan didn't want that. He wasn't ready to give up. Despite his fear, he knew something much greater was drawing them together. She made him feel something he had never felt before. Now he was determined to find a way to protect Claire, and himself, from the forces trying to tear them apart. After everything that happened to Ethan, Claire decided to distance herself. She avoided his stares, his conversations, and even the places they used to go together on campus. Ethan, however, refused to accept this distance. He knew that Claire was trying to protect him, but he didn't want to abandon her. Something about him insisted that resisting was the only way. One night, Ethan decided to act. He ran to Clara's house, something he had never done before. When he arrived, he found the door ajar. A chill ran down his spine. He entered carefully, calling for her, but there was complete silence, which only made him more nervous. Inside the house, Ethan felt an almost physical weight in the air. Melted candles were scattered around the room, and strange symbols were drawn on the walls. Finally, he found Claire at the center of a circle of runes, surrounded by black smoke swirling around her. She was kneeling, holding an amulet that glowed with a golden light. When she noticed Ethan, her eyes widened in desperation. "You shouldn't be here," she shouted, her voice echoing through the space. "Claire, what's happening?" Ethan asked, but before he could approach, the black smoke attacked him, enveloping and suffocating him. He struggled, trying to shake off the smoke, but it wouldn't dissipate. He was beginning to lose his breath when Claire murmured strange words, and the smoke retreated for a moment. "I'm trying to protect you," she said, her voice trembling. "These entities want you out of my life. And if you keep pushing forward, they'll consume everything around us." "I don't care," Ethan shouted back, gasping for air, tears in his eyes. "I'm not leaving you alone. If they want to fight, then let them fight me too." Claire hesitated, and Ethan seized the moment to step into the circle. He quickly wrapped his arms around her in a firm embrace. As soon as he did, the runes glowed brightly, and the shadows screamed in pain and fury. Ethan held Claire's hand tightly. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to face this by yourself," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm with you." His words seemed to break something inside her. Claire gripped his hand and began chanting a new spell, now with more confidence. The shadows recoiled, thrashing and roaring before finally dissipating. When silence finally returned and the tension in the room eased, Claire collapsed into Ethan's arms. Both were terrified but alive. In that moment, she realized there was no way to push him away, not after everything they had faced together. "You're an idiot for coming here," she said, smiling despite the tears in her eyes. "And you're an idiot for thinking I would let you go," he replied, smiling as he hugged her tightly. They knew this wasn't over. Something still lurked in the shadows, waiting. But at that moment, the bond between them was stronger than any evil that might come their way. Time seemed to work against Ethan and Claire. Supernatural events began returning, and each day the signs of the dark forces grew more intense. Ethan started seeing shadows passing by his window, disappearing when he blinked. Claire began feeling constantly watched, even in her sleep. The noose was tightening, and they both knew they had to end it. One night, Claire had a vision. She saw Ethan in danger, surrounded by those beings in a place she recognized, an old, abandoned chapel in the forest behind the college grounds. "That's where this will end," she said with determination. "Either we face this or you'll never be safe." Despite Ethan's desire to protect her, Claire insisted they both needed to go. "We can only defeat them if we're together," she affirmed. Though apprehensive, he agreed, and together they set off toward the chapel from her dream under the light of the full moon. The chapel was a terrifying place, unlike any other they had seen. It emanated a malevolent energy, its walls covered in ancient, scribbled symbols, and the air suffocating, heavy with negativity. In the center of the main hall, a circle was drawn on the floor, surrounded by black candles burning faintly. As soon as they entered, the doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang and silence engulfed the space. Soon, a deep, distorted voice echoed through the room, accompanied by a powerful wind. "You dare defy the natural balance of this world. Too many secrets have already been revealed. You ignored my warnings, and now you will pay for challenging me and disturbing the order." Ethan felt the ground tremble. He looked at Claire, who seemed afraid but gathered her courage to speak with determination and a firm voice. "We won't surrender. I love Ethan, and I won't let you harm him." The shadows gathered inside the circle, twisting and contorting into grotesque forms. They seemed to be sucked into the ground, and soon something horrifying began to emerge from the center. It was thick, black smoke that formed a creature darker than the night itself, with a pair of horns and large red eyes filled with deep hatred. It began moving toward them. Ethan held Claire's hand tightly. "Quick, what do we need to do?" "Trust me," Claire replied. She started chanting in an ancient language, her voice echoing with a power that seemed to come from another world. The creature hesitated briefly but kept advancing. That's when Ethan realized the circle of candles was the key. Ethan had brought holy water, and racing against time, he dashed to the center of the room and began extinguishing the candles by pouring water on them while Claire continued her incantation. Each candle extinguished made the creature roar, but it also enraged the entity. When Ethan reached the final candle, the creature violently lunged at Claire, knocking her to the ground. Ethan put out the last candle and shouted for Claire, but even though the shadow was now weaker and more translucent, it began consuming her. Using the last of her strength, Claire screamed, "Inside the circle, Ethan!" He quickly saw that at the center of the circle lay a large black skull-shaped stone and understood the situation. Luckily, a metal rod was nearby. Ethan ran to grab it. The entity released Claire and rushed toward him, but before it could attack, Ethan struck the skull with all his strength, shattering it in two. A deafening scream echoed through the chapel as the entity dissipated, vanishing like smoke in the wind. Silence returned, heavy but filled with relief. Ethan rushed to Claire, his heart pounding. She was exhausted but began to rise, and he helped her up. "Are you okay?" he asked, gently holding her face. Claire leaned in and gave Ethan a long kiss. He blushed slightly, then began to smile. "Yes, I am now," she replied, a smile of relief on her face. "It's over?" They weren't certain the ordeal had truly ended, but in that moment, embraced in the chapel, something gave them the sense that things would get better, along with the certainty that they would face everything together. As Ethan and Claire recovered inside the chapel, a soft, bluish glow emanated from the floor where the candles and the black skull had been, now reduced to dust. Slowly, A symbol began to form as if engraved by an invisible force. It was a circle of runes with lines that seemed to pulse with energy. Claire observed it closely, her expression a mix of awe and understanding. This is a mark of protection, she said, her voice still weak. This evil has been sealed. At least for now, it won't bother us anymore. A faint satisfied smile began to form on her face. Ethan, however, furrowed his brow. But why so much effort to separate us? What are these shadows really? Claire sighed, standing up with his help. These dark entities are guardians of an ancient pact. Centuries ago, my family made a vow to protect an ancient magical power that was passed down through generations. If this knowledge were used with the wrong intentions, it could bring chaos to the world. Part of the pact required that we, the descendants, never form bonds with anyone outside our circle. Ethan tried to process this. So, the fact that we're together, does that break the pact? Claire shook her head. Not exactly, but they don't want anyone outside the pact to know about this spiritual world. They fear that our relationship could trigger something greater, something they can't control. It's a reaction to the unknown. So what happens now? Ethan asked, holding her hand. Claire smiled, though there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. Now we move forward. We don't know if these beings will return, but what we do know is that we have each other. What matters is that we're not alone. They left the chapel, leaving behind everything they had faced. The forest around them seemed calmer, and for the first time Ethan felt a sense of peace, as if there was a future for them after all. As they walked under the light of dawn, Claire squeezed Ethan's hand. I always thought I had to deal with this world on my own, in my own way, she confessed. But you showed me that I don't have to distance myself. You showed me I can live a life like any other girl. Ethan smiled. And you showed me that the world is so much more than I ever expected. Together, they disappeared down the path leading back to the college, their hearts full of hope and the certainty that no matter how dark the challenges ahead, they would always find light in each other.